Okay, just a quick recap of what we did with the creative process. And this is, again, just very, without diving in too deep, kind of starting out with what we would refer to as our thumbnail sketches. And we just went through a series of different arrangement designs. And again, all you're trying to do is come up with an arrangement of your major elements to make sure you've thought through about different ways to position each image and where your type's going to be. And then from there, we went and developed our rough sketch, which is a little bit more detailed. And I went back and tried to create a little bit more detail because this will be kind of my blueprint for when I get to Photoshop. I'll kind of have a pretty good plan about how I'm going to arrange things. I've got some measurements in here, some things that are based on the project specs that I'm providing. We're going to set it up at 1920 by 1080 pixels, which is about the size of a typical monitor, and we're going to set it at 140 pixels per inch because that's about the resolution of a 4K computer monitor. You can go with a little bit less than that, but we're just trying to kind of cover all our bases here. Also got some measurements in here for the images that I need because I'm going to need to know that once I start this process. So let's kind of go ahead and jump into Photoshop. Okay, hope everybody's ready to move into Photoshop. So we went through the thumbnail and rough sketch process. Now we're going to jump right into Photoshop. And if you look at my desktop, I've already collected all of my images that I'm planning to use on my photo collage, which is our first project. And I'm going to kind of run through a few things that are essential to making sure that your project is going to work out like we want, and their image is going to look nice and sharp. So we're going to talk about a few things here with the image size dialog box. So if I just grab one of these images, and of course I've got Photoshop running down here on my Mac, and you can jump into Photoshop and click File, Open here, and navigate to that particular folder, which is on my desktop, and I called it Dog Family Pics. And I'm just going to use dogs here instead of different family members because I don't have good pictures of everybody. But anyway, so we can go to Open here. So there's lots of ways, I think, once you start learning about Photoshop, there's many ways to do things. There's not one necessarily right or wrong. It's just what you prefer in whatever situation you're in. I rarely come to this screen and go to Open. Matter of fact, I usually just grab an image and drag it right to Photoshop down here at the bottom. So if I just drag an image and throw it on the Photoshop icon in the dock, it'll open up that image as well. So a couple of things I want to point out, and of course when we're ready to set up our project file, I would do this a little bit differently in terms of I would just simply go to File, New. If I jump back into Photoshop, and I can go ahead and set that up. And we'll just get that set up and set it aside. So if we look at the new document dialog box, and Photoshop refers to documents, this might be, it's referenced later as you get into Photoshop as your canvas, so sometimes it's a little bit confusing. So sometimes it refers to the canvas size, which is really the document size or image size. But anyway, if we jump over here and look at the size that we want, on the specifications for the project, I'm telling you that I want it to be 1920 by 1080 pixels. So I'm just going to jump in here and type in, 1920 by 1080 pixels. And I'll give you the resolution. So without, again, getting into too much detail, the resolution has to deal with the quality of the image, the clarity, the sharpness, when it's printed or produced on a screen or displayed on a screen. So your newest 4K screens have about a 140 pixel per inch resolution, and when we're talking about pixels, pixels is it's a term that was coined many years ago to describe what they refer to as picture elements. So it's kind of the little dots that make up. If I were to take a magnifying glass and zoom in on my screen, I could actually see little dots which they refer to again as pixels these days. So you just kind of have to know some of this terminology and just kind of beat it into your brain to figure this stuff out. But for right now, we're just going to set it at 140. A lot of your older monitors had a 72 pixel per inch image, and so you'll resolution. So you'll see a lot of images online that you might grab that are 72 pixels per inch, and they're okay if they're just for screen display. But if you display that on a higher resolution monitor, sometimes it'll get a little jagged or pixelated on the edges. Some of the other things that we want to talk about with color mode. So color mode, depends on where you're going. That's one of the things that you'll hear me talk about throughout the course. Is you kind of have to work backwards sometimes. You kind of have to know what is the destination or end use of this image or this project, and that's going to determine how it's going to be built. It's kind of like you building a house. You kind of have to have a foundation. How big is the footprint of the house? You kind of have to know that first. So the same thing with building documents and producing images. You kind of have to know what the end result is in order to set your width and your resolution and your height and all that stuff, as well as the color mode. So if I knew this was going to be a print document, like something that was going to be printed on an offset press, I probably would work in CMYK color versus RGB color. And again, I'm trying to kind of approach this first project without getting into too much detail, because we have folks in the class that this is all brand new to them. So for right now, RGB would be, this color mode would be destined for screen display only and not necessarily for print. It's not that you can't use an RGB image for print, but you may get some slight color shifts if you use that. And again, we'll discuss all this stuff as we move forward in the class. But anyway, 1920 by 1080 pixels at 140 pixels per inch. And RGB. Don't worry about the rest of this, and then we're going to hit create. So this is kind of the format or layout of the photo collage, and I've got my rough draft, my rough sketch kind of sitting next to me. That is going to be my blueprint, and I need to refer to that. So what you don't want to do is create this rough sketch and this, go through the thumbnail sketches and rough sketches, and you just toss that aside and then create your own thing once you get to Photoshop. That's not the plan. You want to take the plan that you've created and then you work your plan. So you've heard that before: plan your work, work your plan. That's kind of what we're doing. We've planned our work with our rough sketch. Now we're going to work that plan or create that. So I'm just going to leave this file like it is, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to open up, because what you want to do is you want to prepare your images prior to bringing them into your photo collage if possible. You can do it all in here, but it makes life a little bit easier if you prepare your images prior to importing them or getting them into your photo collage file. So I'm going to go back to File, Open, and again, I can do this a number of ways, but I'm going to go to File, Open. If you'll notice, I've got it kind of navigates right back to the folder that I was just in. So I have an image here that I'm going to pull up, and I can zoom in if I go to View. And one thing, if you'll look at the keyboard command shortcuts to the right over here of each command, you kind of need to, you want to work a little bit more efficiently, kind of memorize these keyboard commands. And one thing with the keyboard commands in most of the Adobe software is that they're universal. So if I want to zoom in and zoom out in Photoshop, it's Command plus sign. Or Command minus sign. The same thing works in Illustrator, InDesign, and all the other programs. So same thing with that you see in File, Open, it's Command 0 or O. You can kind of see that Command N for a new document. Again, this is across all Adobe products. So you can kind of become a power user by using your keyboard shortcuts. That'll really make things go a little bit faster. But anyway, back to this document. And I'm going to zoom in. So normally I would just do Command plus, but I'm going to zoom in this way. And in looking at this image, and one of the things that I want to point out, when you're trying to evaluate images, you need to look at a couple things. The first thing that I always do is run into image size. This is going to tell me what the physical size of this image is, as well as how many pixels per inch are in here. Just because it's 72 doesn't mean that, oh, you can't use it because it's not up to specs. So what'll happen is if you were to print this image at this size, at 72 pixels per inch, it's going to tend to print a little pixelated. If I zoom in, you can see what I mean by when I say pixelated, it'll look kind of blocky and fuzzy on the edges. So if I'm looking at it on screen, you know, that image looks okay on screen. So if this was going to be used on screen, it would be okay. But if I'm thinking that this is going to be printed somewhere, then I obviously need to find an image that has a higher resolution. So again, some of these rules of thumb that you'll just need to know, that if this was going to be printed on a digital press or an inkjet printer, I'm going to need more resolution than this, or that image is going to come out pixelated. So how do you get the image the right size? Well, depending on what I wanted to do with this, you might have enough image data here. And so what you can do to check, let's say I needed to print this on a wide format press or something, an inkjet press, and which mine tells me I need about 150 pixels per inch. So if I turn off resample, and we'll discuss that in a little bit more detail. You should have read about some of this stuff already. If I go to 150, it says I can use this, you know, I might be able to use this image if I'm only printing it at about a 3 by 2 inch image. Well, that's not very big. But depending on what your destination is, that might be fine. So don't just find the, you know, look at the resolution and go, oh, image size is not right. Let me show you another example, and I'm just going to hold Option, and I can reset anytime in here. So this takes it back to the original size. Let me pull up another image real quick, and I'll illustrate what I'm talking about. So if I go over here and I grab any other ones of these images, I come over to image size and can see that this is a pretty good size image, almost 20 by 14 at 300 pixels per inch. So this is plenty big for anything in that range that I might need to be printed on an offset press. But let me knock the resolution down. And what I'm going through now, when I say resample, you have to be careful with this checkbox here, because when I say resample, that means I'm going to add pixels or throw away pixels. So let me get this down to the size that I might need for my project. And I said I needed 140 pixels per inch. And if you look up here where it says image size, did I throw away pixels or did I add pixels? Well, the image was 70 megabytes. Now it's down to 15. So I have actually downsampled or tossed pixels out. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with downsampling, because there's no reason to lug around all this extra image data if I don't need it. I'm not going to be able to tell the difference when I go to print it. It's still going to look just as sharp. So if I hit OK, yeah, it got a little smaller, but I can zoom back in and you can see it looks just as good because I have enough image resolution in there. So again, this image size dialog box, you need to get familiar with that. So if I went the other way, let's say that I need this image printed on a poster that's 24 by 36, and I was going to be printing it on an offset press that requires 300 pixels per inch. So if I come in here and say make that 36 by 25 or so, did the image get bigger or smaller? Look at your image size data up here. It was 70 megabytes. Now it's 240 megabytes. So I'm adding pixels, and that's kind of a no-no. So if I'm adding pixels, you can't kind of lie to Photoshop and say, hey, I need it to be 24 by 36 roundabout area at 300. So I'm just going to turn on this resample dialog box and tell it that. I'm going to say make that, 36 wide by 24. I'm adding pixels, or what we refer to as upsampling. Upsampling is kind of a no-no, because when I do that, I'm letting Photoshop decide on what to add and what not to add. So you don't really see it in here, but when I go to print, I'm going to get some, this is not going to print as sharp as you're seeing now. So it can kind of fool you based on what you see on your screen with what you're going to get on the final output. So be careful of the image size dialog box in that resample box. So how do you know if you're upsampling or downsampling? look at your image size, your image data. So if the file size is getting smaller, I'm tossing pixels out, which is okay to do. Just make sure you don't forget what your target resolution or target output will be, meaning your end use of that product will be. So sometimes you don't really know what you're going to need until you get into the image size dialog box here. So be careful of the resample. For what I want for my project that we've got here, I'm saying that my images only need to be 2 by 1.5 high, which is really small. So I've got plenty of resolution and plenty of size here. So again, this we'll kind of take a short break here after and let you experiment with the image size dialog box. Okay, welcome back. We're still in Photoshop as far as getting started. And I apologize for the length of this video, but again, I want to be thorough, and I'm not there in a face-to-face environment in order to walk you through this like this. But anyhow, we were looking at the image size dialog box, and what we're trying to do in this phase is we're going to set up our document, and we want to go ahead and get all of our images halfway prepped and saved and moved over into our photo collage file. But if one of the things when we open up an image, get into the image size dialog box, make sure you have enough data. So these are going to be the individual photos. We've decided that my image size for my individual photos only need to be 2 by 1.5 at 140. So let me kind of show you the crop tool, because you can kind of set all of that. If you feel like you've got enough image size and image data, there's a little bit easier way to kind of get the image to be the size that you want. So over here on the toolbar, and again, if you looked at the previous videos, you saw that there's different kind of workspaces that you can set up for what it is, and sometimes it switches your tools out a little bit. I think by default it comes up under Essential, is what it says here. So you can kind of reset and save your workspace, and again, that was kind of discussed. I'm going to set mine back to Essential. But over here on the left side of my window here, and you can move your toolbar around, but I just like to let it sit there, is that we can set our crop tool. So if we get our crop tool up here in the top of my document window, we get some data up here. So that happens a lot. Whenever I switch tools, I get options that switch out up top here. So same thing, when I get the crop tool, it says that I can set my crop tool to the width, height, and resolution that I want. Well, being that I know that we have enough resolution, because I looked at the image size prior to when I first opened up this file, I know that I can go in here and set some of this, and I'm going to kind of show you. So my individual sizes, based on my rough layout, were 2 inches wide by 1.5 high. So I'm just going to type that in up here, and then my pixels per inch that I wanted was 140, and I need mine to be in portrait, so I can just flip this, and now we get a portrait size. And so now I can move this around, and I can crop. So whatever I crop it at, that's the size that it's going to be. And so I can kind of quickly position this, and if we notice, this is kind of broke up in thirds, because that's helping us with something we refer to as the rule of thirds, where we want kind of the focal point to kind of be in the top 2/3 area here. So once I do that, I can just double click, or I can hit enter, and that will resize my image for 2 by 1.5 at 140. So if you notice, it's a little pixelated because I'm zoomed in quite a bit. Look at my ruler guide up here, that this is only 1.5 inches wide. So that's way bigger than what I'm going to be viewing it at. This is probably closer to the actual size, somewhere in here. Of course, you can zoom in and zoom out with your magnifying glass. You can click and drag to zoom into a specific area. But now this image is ready to go into my master file or my photo collage file. So I'm going to go to File and Save As, and I'm going to save it to my computer, and I'm going to call this, I'm not sure what kind of dog that is, but I'm just going to say um, small dog 1, and I'm going to let this be saved as a Photoshop file for now. You can leave it as a JPEG, but I'm just going to change it to a Photoshop document now and save that. So once I go through each of my files, getting them the right size, getting them the right resolution, then I can get them into, this is my 1920 by 1080 photo collage file. So one thing you can do, and there's a couple ways to do this, you can get your move tool, and I can just click and drag, and I move over here to this document, and it highlights that, and I just let go, and there's my image. And remember, I've got my rough sketch sitting here in front of me that I would use to kind of align everything. So I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to go to Open, and I'm going to find another image to prepare. Let's grab this guy. He's nice and cute. Let's see if I have enough image data. Go to Image Size, 8 by 9 at 300 pixels per inch. Again, I only need it to be and I can do it in here. I can say I want it 2 wide by 1.5, which I got way more height than I need. So I would have to crop some of that, and I need the resolution to just be 140. That's okay. You want to be careful. This little chain link here keeps the proportions of the original. The sure sign of an amateur doing something with Photoshop is that they distort images. So if I were to change this to 1.5, you see how he got real squatty, and that's not what I want. So I was saying 1.5 this way by 2 this way. You see he gets stretched out. So I don't like that. So again, if I hold Option down, I can reset this image size dialog box and not have to back out of it. So what I would do in this case, I would say I want the width to be 1.5, and let the height and width stay linked through this linking chain here. And then the resolution, do I want resample on or off? Well, I want to toss image data out because I only need it to be 140 pixels per inch. So I'm going to turn resample on, which means go ahead and toss data out. So if you notice, my file size was 23 meg. Now it's down to 143K, which is a whole lot smaller, a whole lot easier to move in and around. And again, that's another way to do this. Now, this is not quite the right proportions, remember. I wanted it to be, 140 pixels per inch, 2 inches high by 1.5 wide. If I turn on get my crop tool, you can see that it's not quite right. I need to move some things around in here. Oh, let me back out. Command Z, undo. That's something that you need to pay attention to. So you can kind of move this left or right. I don't want it really off center like that. I'm going to kind of have him in here. So I can do that. And again, it's a little bit, lower resolution than what you're seeing. You can see it's a little pixelated, but by the time I get this ready to go, it's going to be fine. So save this. So I would just repeat this, turn that off so it doesn't come up again. Let me jump back in there to just touch base on this, because this is going to be by default on yours, where I want to make sure that I'm saving this in the right place. You have the option when you go to save it, saying you want to save it on your local computer or do you want to save it into the cloud. I like to save it on the local computer because there's a limited cloud space that Adobe provides, and they will end up trying to bill you or charge you for more storage space. So if you've got plenty of storage on your hard drive on your local computer, just save it there. There are times when you do want to save things into the Adobe cloud storage, but there's not that much data there. So I'm going to call this the black and white dog and save it in that same folder. Leave it as a PSD for right now and hit save. How do I get it over here to this file? There's a couple of ways. Easiest way, get the move tool, click and drag, hover over that new tab of where that file is, and then drop it. So here's my new file. You can see my smart guides are kind of helping me align this. So I would kind of repeat that. And let's kind of take a pause right there. What I would do when I started, once I got all of my images in here, I would come over here and use my ruler guides to try to determine, where this the halfway point is. That way I can kind of align things a little bit easier and move things around. So if I had an image over here, it would kind of quickly align. So use your ruler guides. You get your ruler guides by just moving into the ruler. If your rulers aren't on, which mine are on, you can see if the rulers aren't there, you can't get at those ruler guides. So if you go to View and do Rulers, and again, this works across all Adobe software. So if you can remember that Command R will turn on your rulers. Then you can come in here and drag your ruler guides. And they don't print, they're just there for you to kind of help you align things. And they just kind of snap in place. And again, I'm just kind of eyeballing this for right now. But let me go back, go to another document real quick. Let's see if I haven't, I don't think I've used this guy yet. So I'm going to grab him, check to see if I have enough image data. So you kind of got to repeat. I got plenty of size, plenty of resolution. Cancel that, get my crop tool. It's already set. I can zoom out. Now, I want this one a little bit tighter. You can see I've got all this space up top. I can make this a little bit tighter. Again, I got plenty of resolution here. I don't need all this space at the top. I want them to be a little bit more like the other images that I have in there. And zoom in here. And I don't have to save this as is, but I'm going to go ahead and save it. And I'm going to call this guy Yellow Dog. And save it as a Photoshop file. And here's that option. You can save to your cloud or save it to local. I'm just going to leave it on my local drive. And again, I could move that. Another way to do that, to get it, is you can select all in here, which is Command A, like that. And where's it? Under layer. Can't remember where they put that. Here we go. Select all. They move these things around. So select all. And you can copy if you want to do it that way. And then come over here and then you can just paste. And it brings it in that way. So again, there's multiple ways to get things moved around in Photoshop. I just like to click and drag. The click and drag option using the move tool works good for me. And then I'm going to go back to File, Open, find my last dog, wherever he went to. Here he is, like this little guy. Again, check to see if I've got enough image data. All these were downloaded from a Shutterstock, which is a high resolution, royalty-free, so to speak, image website that you can grab these high-res images. Plenty of image data for what I need. So I can just, again, go get the crop tool and move this around in here. He's a little bit big compared to everybody else as far as taking up a lot more screen. What you don't want to do is come out here like this, because then you're going to have this dead white space in your image. And I don't want to do that right now. I'm just going to kind of go with this size right here. And again, I don't have to save. I could just click and drag him over here real quick and throw him in there and line him up. And there I am. So I've got a group image, or my family portrait, so to speak. And if I can find him, where did he go? Here's my family portrait. So I'm going to open that. So this size is a little bit different. It says it needs to be 4 by 5.5, but first things first, go to look to see if I have enough image size. So my size is bigger than I need, and the resolution is more than I need. So again, I can use my crop tool and set that image size like I want. I said I wanted it 5.5 wide. Whoop, 5.5 wide by 4 tall, like that. And even though my image is getting a little bit clipped, I'm just going to go with it because we're just trying to go through this here. Save that, or save my crop, drop it in here. Here's my image all ready to go. And that kind of halfway aligns with my rough sketch that I've got right in front of me. So we kind of got all my images in place. I do have on my sketch, my rough sketch, I said I wanted some kind of background image instead of just going to completely white. And so if I jump over here, so I've got, of course, got all these tabs open. I can close those out. Don't save him, don't save him. And I've got a background image in here that I grabbed. If I can find him. And this one's coming in a little bit differently. So this is an EPS file. That's okay. Photoshop can rip that. But it's going to ask you, what image size do I want it to be? How do I want to rip it? Look at the size of this file. That's a gigabyte. So unless you've got a screaming computer with tons of memory, you want to avoid ripping something that's going to be that big. Again, so we said we're working in RGB. We only needed to be 140. So here's where you're kind of setting that image size. And I'm going to be in pixels since I want this to fill up my background. And again, it's 1920 by 1080. So that's not quite big enough that way. So I'm going to set the height to be 1080 and let my width go a little bit bigger. But go ahead and rip that and bring that in. It kind of creates this size, and I can just drag it over into here. And then, of course, I can stretch it out and make it the size that I want. Now, come over here after I resized it, you can see that if I go back to pixels, it's bigger than I need at 2160 by 1080. So it's in here and it's big enough because, again, I've got more size than I need. One thing I want you to get in the habit of doing is leaving your transform controls on, because if I didn't have that, I really wouldn't know where the outer dimensions are of this. And I'm going to hide my guides real quick just to clean up my screen a little bit. So if I turn on show transform controls, that allows me to click and drag. Now you got to be careful. I don't want to resize this thing because I'm changing resolution as I'm resizing on here. So I'm going to undo that, let it be the size that I spec'd it at. But I remember I had too much width. That's okay. It's just going to get clipped. And if I'm covering up everything, if I look at my layers panel, and we haven't talked about that yet, but every time I bring in a new layer, or bring in a new image, it put it on its own layer. And that's okay. I like layers. Been using Photoshop before layers existed, so it's become very handy. But I want this on the bottom, so I'm going to click and drag that layer and stick it under the bottom of layer 1. It's a little bit distracting because it's so so much contrast here. So you can change the opacity of that layer because I just want like a little background texture. Okay. So this is where I'm at now. I would add my type, just like you would think in terms of any other type tool. Get my type tool here, and there's options underneath that, and click and drag. And I'm going to say the Downey family, or the Downeys, if I could only type. Okay. So just like in other software, if you click and drag, you can change the size in here, and you can change the font, whatever it is. I got too many fonts in my system, but we'll just grab anything, preferably not in some foreign language. Grab something like this, and I can, little tricks up here in the toolbar, if you click and drag to the right, I get a double-headed arrow. That's another little Photoshop trick. You can just kind of drag and visually get the size that you want, or you can just select everything in here. Whoop. Select your type, and we'll go more into type and hold Shift Command, and then your right greater than or less than arrows is a quick way to resize type as well. So I'm just doing the greater than symbol, which is next to the M character on there, and let's say that's what I want. And of course, I can get real picky here and say a line in the center like this. And certainly there's a whole lot more that I could do here, and I'll revisit some of this stuff later, but that's kind of the basic steps of producing this collage. So we kind of got all the elements in place. Got to save. I should have been saving along the way, but we can do File, Save As. And I'm just going to let this be a Photoshop document now because it will save all of my layers. So I can say this is the Downy Dog collage. And I'm going to save it in that same folder. But if I were to save this as a JPEG, and I'll go back and do that because that's part of the requirements. If I go and save this like this as a JPEG, which you're going to do, it's going to flatten everything. So if I wanted to make any edits, you'll notice on my JPEG, if I can pull him up, there he is. If you'll notice on my layers panel, I have one layer. So if I need to edit or move anything or switch out one of these pictures, I can't really do it at this point easily. So that's why I want to save as my Photoshop document, because then I could go back into any one of these layers and move around. And if you'll notice, I didn't resize any of the images in here once I got it in here, because when I start resizing, now I'm affecting pixel data. And if I spread this out more like this, now it's going to print fuzzy because I no longer have 140 pixels per inch. I have less than that. So you don't want to. That's why I want to emphasize prepping your images prior to getting them in, because then you'll know it's going to be right. So again, if I wanted to do any edits, maybe I wanted to do some kind of type effect. I wanted to put a little shadow or a glow. I can use my layers panel, use my layer effects, come down here, and let's say I just want a little drop shadow to give it a little depth, and I'll crank it up so you can really kind of see that. There's all kinds of options in here. He's a little bit too dark, but you can see I can get a little bit more depth now. So there's all kinds of options in Photoshop. I can apply that across many pictures. Maybe I want to put a stroke around all these pictures. I can do it just with the same thing. Maybe a 2-point stroke. It says you want it inside or outside. You got all kinds of options. We could go on forever here. So now if I click off of that, you can see I've got like a 2-point stroke around that. And so you can get all these layer effects that you can do. That might be something that I want to apply to all. So I can just come over here to my layers panel and say, you know what, hold, where'd he go? Use that particular layer effect across everything if I wanted to. Same thing. And again, I think it's shift. So if I hold shift and grab that stroke effect, I can apply it to every single one of them without having to do a whole lot. Where do you go? Here. And he needs one. And then these two need one. You can just kind of apply. You can copy the layer style. There's, again, lots of ways to do things in here. So paste the layer style, and that gives me the same thing in terms of stroking it. Again, do it manually. Whoop, I don't need the inner shadow. Just go stroke in here, and it applies it that way. So I lost that stroke here. Add him back. So now we've got something that's got a little bit more depth to it because we added that little stroke. We added a little drop shadow on some of these. Again, I can apply this and keep right on tweaking. But again, that's kind of the gist. So the objective of this project was learning how to open files, how to get them to the right image size, getting them positioned on your screen, getting it set up and saved in the right way that matches the project specs. So good luck with this. I hope, again, we can sit here and play with this stuff over and over to tweak it any way we want. And again, this was just kind of an introductory project, and we'll be excited to see how yours comes out. Save what I got. And there we go. So now we can go back in. All my layers are still there. Remember, if you flatten it, save it as a JPEG, all your layers go away. So stay tuned. We'll be diving a little bit more into Photoshop as the course goes on.